Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of June. It's a beautiful sunny Northumberland morning. I now had to close the curtains because the sun is so bright. It just bleaches my face. We're going to look at another saint. Yesterday we were looking at Alban, someone who lived somewhere between 200 and 300 in our country. And we're moving forward about 400 years to the 600s. That time when there was this explosion of Christianity in our country, often through the work of the Celtic and Anglo-Saxon saints, but also through the work of missionaries who came from the continent directly, Frankish missionaries, and people sent from Rome. And it was a time of great flux, and it was a time when Christianity was emerging in our country. And a woman was born who's called Etheldreda or Aetheldreda, and she has a couple of other names, among which is Audrey, but we'll think of her as Aetheldreda. And she was the daughter of Anna, who was a Christian king. Anna was a man's name in those days, and he was a Christian king of the East Angles over in East Anglia. And she, from a very early age, found faith and made a commitment to follow God in a religious life, in a vow of chastity and of following God. Now, that's all very well, but in those days, women had very little ability to determine their own futures, and the daughters of kings were regarded as valuable diplomatic tools. And she was first of all married off to a man called Tonbert, who was a vassal servant of her father, an ealdorman, an earl, and although she was married to him, she continued to live out her vow as a follower of God. And 3 years into their marriage, he died, and she continued to live her religious life on the Isle of Ely, and we'll go back to Ely later on. She was then, there needed to be an alliance between East Anglia and Northumberland, from which I'm speaking to you. And at the request, it says in the book, but really on the direction of her family, she was married to Egfrith, who was much younger than her. He was the 15-year-old son of King Oswy, who was the king of Northumberland, which is by then really the premier kingdom of the country. It was another political union, nothing to do with their affections or anything like that. It was a political union. And she married him, but gained his agreement, because this wasn't a love match, it was a political match, that she could remain vowed and committed to following God. So it was a political marriage, not a romantic marriage. And this continued for 15 years. But Egfrith got a bit fed up with this and wanted really a proper marriage, and many times tried to persuade her that they should abandon their agreed relationship and start a proper marriage. But she resisted this. She resisted this, and found the support of bishops, even Bishop Wilfrid, and was eventually allowed to dissolve the marriage and continue her primary commitment, which was to be a follower of God in this early religious life. And she went off to Coldingham, which is just up the coast here from us, under the care and protection of St. Ebba, who is one of the patron saints of our benefice. And it was there that she entered fully into the fullness of the religious life. But she was a woman of great strength and great talent, and she went and founded a new monastic house at Ely. And it was one of these Anglo-Saxon houses, which were joint houses, ruled over by an abbess, but they were for men and women living in separate accommodation, but coming together for worship. And the monastic community she founded in Ely led to the later great abbey at Ely, and eventually, after the desecration and destruction of the monastic communities by Henry VIII, another political step, the great cathedral at Ely that we see now. And if you go to Ely, there's a window with her holding a model of the cathedral, as it were, showing that she is the foundress of the community that is there. And what we have there in this story is one of those stories that we find in Ebba and in Hilda and in some of the other Anglo-Saxon women, of women who in a situation where everything was stacked against them, through their faith in Christ, emerged as leaders and as women of God who drew others and pointed others to Jesus Christ. And that's important. It's part of our Christian heritage, of the men and women of our country who followed Christ, who followed God, and who drew others. May God bless us in that vocation of pointing others to the love of God.